Welcome to the History Bards Historical Movie Reviews. It's movie time starting in 4, 3, 2, 1. With your hosts, Michael Zucker and Marley. Today's movie review, Lawrence of Arabia, directed by David Lean.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the History Bards podcast. This is your host, Michael Zucker, author of The Eisenhower Chronicles. With me today is recurring guest.
Recurring guest, thanks. I'm Dee Marley of the Historical Fiction Company, the co-host.
So today we have another classic historical fiction film to review. And today we're doing a very special episode about my personal favorite film, Lawrence of Arabia. This film to me is sort of, a gold standard, both of film, of historical fiction, of the subgenre of biographical fiction, of character depth. I would almost describe it as mixing a couple of, great storytelling elements. One being the epic quest, as Lawrence is going into sort of what's to him an exotic land on a, what's supposed to be a heroic journey, and that's almost it reminds me of writers like Homer, Dante, Herman Melville, Tolkien, that type of epic quest. But what's unique about it is it's mixing that element with a level of character depth that I would compare to, Shakespeare's greatest works.
Yeah, I agree.
And so those two elements together produce a really special, film and adventure.
It is special. It is special, but there is like a vast gap between those who really like it and those who don't.
Right, and we can touch on that. The film is not as accessible, and it's a little more subtle, I think, than some other great films.
Yes.
Something like The Godfather is a bit more open with its character and themes.
Oh, for sure.
and its pacing in a way that Lawrence is a bit more hidden in a way.
Yeah.
And given the subject matter that the film is dealing with, that David Lean, the director, probably felt he had to be kind of subtle with it in order to represent it, but not sort of push too hard against the sort of social norms of the era.
Right.
But yeah, to me, like, this film, the cinematography, is arguably the greatest in film history. I mean, it's stunning, the shots of the Jordanian desert. Yes. And Lawrence's character arc and character depth, to me, might be the greatest in film history.
Yeah, there's so many iconic scenes that whenever you think of the movie, you think of like when he first gets the clothing and he's walking around, spreading his like,
and he's so
walking
joyful
around. Yeah, he's so happy. There was another one. Oh, whenever he's walking on the top of the train, the same way, and the photographer's wanting to get his picture. It's, you have those iconic moments that you think of whenever you think of the movie.
Iconic moments, but they also are part of his character arc, I think.
Yes.
They represent certain parts of it. And I'm trying to think, maybe we can just sort of jump into that, because to me, that's
sure.
As much as I love the cinematography, to me, like, the character arc is the thing that really kind of won me over, as far as like this movie's doing something very, very special.
Yeah.
And I would say it's not only similar to sort of future anti-heroes that would arrive in both film and television, like, we mentioned The Godfather, so like Michael Corleone, or like Walter White from Breaking Bad, which is also set in a desert environment. But I think it's well documented that this film helped to inspire those characters and the way that they were represented in those films and shows.
Right.
So I think discussing the character arc is a great place to sort of dig in. So to me, this film its main theme is a search for identity.
Yeah.
I think that's very clear. I mean, even like in the opening segment, where he's riding his motorcycle and then falls off. But like when he's riding it though, I'm wearing glasses and he's wearing like these large protective goggles. But when he goes off his motorcycle, the goggles are off and they're hanging from a branch.
Yeah.
Which is sort of is a way of like David Lean is saying that, he's hidden and now we're gonna sort of learn who he is.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, an introduction to this theme. And then we go to his funeral, or not, I don't know if it's his funeral, but like people are visiting his gravesite
at St. Paul's.
At St. Paul's, and there's just discussions of like, well, who was this person? And it's pretty clear that everybody has an impression of him, but nobody really knows him.
Right.
Because he grew from a man into a myth.
Yeah.
And the film is interrogating that myth.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you bring that up because one of the scenes that I remember that kind of even plays into that as well for him as a character, like him trying to figure out who he was and that whole character arc and everything, is whenever he crosses the desert and comes to the canal and he sees the motorcycle and the guy starts yelling, "Who are you?" And that's he's standing there like, who am I? You can tell he was thinking that.
That's arguably the key line of the entire film is "Who are you?" And
yes.
I don't know if you're aware of this. It's interesting though. David Lean himself actually recorded the line and is the one who sang it to Lawrence.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I think that's kind of like a special little insight that like he sang it to his own character, to kind of attack the core thematic point of the film. So when we meet Lawrence in his office in Cairo, kind of after the little prologue segment at his funeral, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed this. His uniform is a bit different from the rest of the British officers.
Yeah.
So he stands out. He kind of bumps into things. He's just awkward. I think somebody calls him a clown. Just clearly he doesn't fit in from where he starts in the film. And one reason he wants to go into the Arabian desert is to try to, find who he is, become a hero, that type of thing, find his place in the world. And I think the critical part of his character arc is he has almost an artificial identity that exists within like the conscious level of his thinking.
Yes.
And at the start of the film, I think some of the elements of that artificial identity are he is an intellectual pacifist, a man of very strong willpower who can overcome anything, and who is sort of has this fascination with the Middle East and with the Arabic people.
Yes.
And so that's sort of the starting point. There's a middle point, and then we're going to get to the ending point. I think one of the most interesting elements of his introductory scene is where he's putting out matches with his fingertips.
Yeah.
And he has this famous line where one of the other officers tries it and says, "Oh, that hurts." And he says, "The secret, Mr. Potter, is not minding that it hurts."
Right.
Now, that moment in itself almost captures the entire character arc in a way.
It
because
does.
The artificial identity that exists at the start of the film thinks to himself, "This shows that I am a man of great willpower and can overcome anything. I don't have to, be intimidated by physical harm or anything like that, or pain."
Yeah.
But what we'll, touch on as we kind of explore his arc is, that deep down, it's not so much that he can overcome pain, it's more that he enjoys it.
Yeah. He definitely does.
That will bring about, a number of literary tragedies, like, whether it be Hamlet or Oedipus or whatever, that, this film is a tragedy. And
yes,
that's how his arc, that's where his arc what his arc results in is sort of a great tragedy in the same way that Michael Corleone's ends in one in Godfather Part 2 or Walter White's in Breaking Bad or so on.
Yeah.
And this helped to bring that type of character into mainstream film, and probably one of the first major historical epics to really approach that type of character.
Yeah, which I think it's really curious because I think in historical fiction versus this historical movie, it really works starting with what happened to him at the very beginning. That's not that doesn't always work in historical fiction. You don't want to reveal what happens to your character in
Right.
the
I think
very
when I
first.
initially saw it, I was thinking, like, I don't know if I love that choice, because like when he's going
Yeah,
through the desert, it's like, well, we know he's going to survive this.
yeah,
I think two thoughts occurred to me though. One of which is that, he died on the motorcycle in real life in, I think, 1934, 1935.
yeah.
This is 1962 when this film came out. Probably everybody in Britain
Everybody
and
knew
America
that.
knows like
Yeah,
what happened to him. So it's not like it's gonna be a big secret for them.
yeah.
The other part is it actually reminds me a lot of the opening of Citizen Kane,
Oh,
where
talk
where
about
he
a movie. Yeah.
dies.
Yes.
And he says Rosebud and all that, and so and then it becomes a question of like, well, who was this person? So in a way, like, they're kind of similar in both their opening and what they do. I think Lawrence of Arabia is much more subtle in
Uh-huh.
how it interrogates its character and what its answer is. But you kind of have to not exactly know what you're looking for, but you have to like really be picking up on what David Lean is saying
Yes.
in a way that, I mean, I
The
won't spoil Citizen
symbolism.
Kane, but
Yeah, don't
by
tell
the end of it,
anybody
it's pretty, well, we might review it one day, but by the end it's pretty clear like what
what
the answer
Rosebud is.
is meant to be.
Right, what Rosebud is.
Yeah.
And for
So
anybody who hasn't seen that, no, we don't need to tell them
yes,
who
spoilers
Rosebud
for
was.
like an 80-year-old.
Yeah, but actually there's
No, there
even
are.
with Lawrence of Arabia, there's people who haven't never seen it.
Of course,
And
yeah.
so
But
we
yes,
definitely don't want to give away any
so
spoilers.
so in a way they're similar, but also I think Lawrence is being more subtle in how it investigates that
Yes,
question.
of
But
course.
so let's say part one of his character arc is, not knowing where he belongs in the world, but thinking he's, an intellectual pacifist interested in the Middle East with a strong willpower. So those handful of elements.
Yeah.
Phase two, I think, starts probably when he's crossing the Nefud Desert, captures Aqaba, and then for most of the rest of the war until he reaches Deraa, and we'll get to that scene because that's a critical scene. But in the middle phase, pretty much after he's proven to himself that he's this great warrior and military strategist, and he's sort of taken on this role of like hero to the Arabic people, basically it goes to his head in a very extreme way.
Very
And
extreme.
he sees himself as almost like a sort of sun god.
Yeah. I think that's the reason why I kind of referred back to our review of The Great Gatsby, because Jay Gatsby viewed himself as that, and that he was always trying to reach something. And so with Lawrence, he may not have known or understood, well, kind of like Jay Gatsby too. He really didn't know who he was until he created this persona. And so you have the same with Lawrence. He was trying to find himself and he discovered it. And it just went beyond what he imagined. And you're right, it went to its head. It totally did.
Well, it went to its head, but I still think with Lawrence though, in this phase, in the middle phase, it's still an artificial self-image.
Oh, yes.
That he views himself as this sun god and almost literally like a messiah to the Arabic people.
Yes.
I mean, the two most obvious examples are, one, he compares himself to Moses, that he can cross the desert.
Yes.
And then in the
remember
Deraa
that.
segment, which is kind of the transition between phase 2 and phase 3, he's talking about walking on water, and he actually walks along a puddle, like thinking to himself, like, oh, I can almost do this. I can almost, literally walk on water, as an allusion to Jesus. And then what was the other? Oh, there's an interview that he has with the reporter character.
The reporter, yeah.
Whose name is slipping my mind right now, but I don't remember the reporter character's name right now, but he's asked, what did the Arabic people want out of this? And he says their freedom. And at first the reporter kind of laughs it off, and then he says, they're going to get it, Mr. Bentley. That's his name, Mr. Bentley. Yeah. He says, and I'm going to give it to them.
I'm going to give it to him, yep.
Yeah. Which, is not exactly a, I'm just the leader, I'm just the representative of a team or something like that. It's more like, no, I am the person who's going to do this.
Yeah.
And, I am their hero. I am their, again, like Messiah type of figure.
And which is so curious you wonder, I mean, I know sometimes even with films or with novels, you take literary license and, everybody kind of has an idea of who T.H. Lawrence was as a person just from history and everything. But it's just curious, like, did he really, really feel that way?
So in my reading of not just the film itself, but like some background info on the film, David Lean, the director, and Robert Bolt, the main screenwriter, I mean, they were pretty open to the fact that they took some liberties in terms of the war parts. It's very simplified. They pull out a lot of the information in order just to make it a more streamlined. I mean, it's already a 4-hour film, but not 7 or 10 hours, or having to break it up into a trilogy of epics like Lord of the Rings would eventually become.
Yeah.
Although apparently Peter Jackson said that that Lawrence of Arabia was a huge influence on his work on Lord of the Rings. But what they were really interested in, David Lean and Robert Bolt, was less the war and more on trying to accurately capture who Lawrence was and the kind of personal journey he went on.
Yeah.
And I guess most of the people who actually served with Lawrence during the Arab Revolt say that they got it basically correct.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. That's what you want.
That Robert Bolt said, he admitted he trifled with the history of how the campaign played out exactly, but that was not really their goal. That it is sort of playing with the myth of Lawrence, and what they were really trying to do was get at who he was, and that they got basically correct. Even though Lawrence's brother, who sold the film rights to Seven Pillars of Wisdom, objected to the portrayal, but
yeah, he did.
As Sam Spiegel, the producer, said to him in person, you knew T.E. Lawrence, you didn't know Lawrence of Arabia, because he wasn't, part of the campaign.
There, right?
Yeah. So let's just touch on. So that's the first two parts of his character arc. Part one being, pacifist intellectual. Part two being, Messiah and sun god. Part three starts with the events in Dara. I think I'm pronouncing that right, or at least I think that's how he pronounces it. And there's some controversy in terms of whether Lawrence in his memoir, Seven Pillars of Wisdom, misrepresented this to some extent, or how accurate this is. But in the film, and the film is subtle about it given the era that it came out in, but it's portrayed that he's both captured by the Turks in Dara and tortured by them.
Yeah, we know that from history.
And, and I know this is a strong term, but was likely raped by them.
Yeah.
And in the next scene, when we see Lawrence kind of walking back in Cairo headquarters, you can see him kind of waddling a bit and kind of have a stiff posture. And it's, to me, it's pretty clear that that's David Lean's way of saying that.
Right. Right.
He was assaulted.
Brutalized. He was brutalized.
In that way, probably gang raped by his Turkish captors.
Right.
And so that initiates the third and final part of his character arc in this film, where he realizes that what he thought was a strong willpower to overcome pain and obstacles was actually an enjoyment of pain, likely a sexual enjoyment of pain, both feeling it and causing it. That one great part of the film that we haven't touched on yet is when he's crossing the Nefu Desert to get to Aqaba, and one of his followers, Gassim, falls into the desert, and Lawrence goes back to rescue him in this kind of heroic moment that shows how great Lawrence is. But then, so there's the two tribes that he's trying to build a coalition between to wage the war. I think it's the Harith and the Hawatats are the names of the tribes.
Yeah.
And Gassim is a Harith, and he murders a Hawatat for reasons that I don't think are totally clear. But
that he stole something. I think that's what they said.
It was something small, and that's And so Lawrence, being an outsider and more of a neutral party and the leader, executes him to sort of avoid a larger blood feud breaking out.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just shoot him; he shoots him 10 times.
10 times.
It's repeated, way past the point where it's needed.
Right.
And afterward, after they capture Aqaba, he makes the journey back to Cairo, and he meets with General Allenby, his superior officer. He says, there's something I didn't like about it. And Allenby's like, well, of course, basically saying, nobody likes time to execute one of their followers. And then Lawrence says, no, I didn't like that. I liked it.
Yeah.
But that I enjoyed it. Which, along with the match scene that we talked about, putting out matches with his fingers, is really foreshadowing the fact that, in more proper terms, Lawrence is a sadomasochist.
Yeah, and I think from history, that is kind of documented that he became that way, or that he was probably that way the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, the film doesn't mention this, but it's known that Lawrence's mother beat him as a child, as a teenager, and that may have planted the seed for this.
Oh, sure.
And then after the war, he would have other British soldiers come to his place and beat him. And, flog him and things. It seems to me that the film, and I think, just in reality, that the events of Dara, the assault by the Turkish officers, are probably the point where he realizes this about himself.
Yeah.
That is sort of he had one image of himself on a conscious level, and then this was lingering under the surface on a more a deeper subconscious level.
Yeah.
And the assault sort of
pushed him over the edge.
It takes apart the conscious self-image, and this emerges as the real him. And his his self-image ruptures, and then in the sort of climactic moment of the film, when he leads the Arabic revolt on its assault toward Damascus, which is sort of the political heart of the Arab world and the sort of target that they're after the entire time, that they see that the Turks have massacred an Arabic village of Tafas.
Yeah.
And between anger over that, anger over the sexual assault, and then this new discovery of his sadism and masochism, Lawrence gives an order to take no prisoners of a Turkish column that they can either go around or easily overwhelm and capture. And instead of doing that, either of those, he orders, gives a no prisoners order and kills thousands of
he does.
Turkish soldiers unnecessarily. And that's sort of the fulfillment of his tragic arc. This discovery that he's not a pacifist, he's not a messiah sun god, he's a butcher or a monster.
Yeah.
And then they take Damascus, and the coalition disintegrates very quickly because somebody like Alexander the Great or Napoleon, he's great at destroying things but not building things. And so the entire coalition that he had built falls apart, and then Britain and France step in and divide the region under the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And that's, and then he's sent back to England because, part of it is, again, you were saying he doesn't know where he belongs in the world. And that, so part of his identity crisis is, I don't like England. He says at one point, England's a country of fat people and I'm different. he's saying that he doesn't belong in England, so he thinks maybe I belong in Arabia and the Messiah of Arabia, and through his tragedy, he learns I don't belong there either, and so he's sent back to England in this one of maybe the greatest final shot ever in film, where he's in this Jeep, and they're driving one way, and there's this different columns. One is a person on a motorcycle, which kind of links back to the beginning of the film, and another is like a group of Arabs on camels. And he stands up, and I think he tries to like salute them, and they just don't even recognize him anymore. And he just kind of sits down, kind of heartbroken, and it's basically just David Lean's way of saying, like, he was looking for his place in the world. He discovered and who he is. He's discovered he's a monster, and he still doesn't belong anywhere.
Right.
And so it's just this brutal, tragic arc. Just to me, the greatest probably in film history.
Yeah.
You can watch more of this review of Lawrence of Arabia in part 2. Thank you for listening to the History Bards Historical Movie Reviews. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and follow us at our YouTube channel at the Historical Fiction Company or on Spotify.